There are 4 parts to the test. Part 1. You will hear a talk on the radio given by an art teacher who became interested in making mosaics, designs made with small pieces of glass and stone. For questions 1 to 8, complete the sentences.
I'd been teaching art for about 10 years when I went on holiday to Greece. While I was there, I became really interested in the art of making mosaics and decided to include this in the courses I run. Many people assume that the Romans invented mosaic, but it was the Greeks who were the true craftsmen, and they, in turn, probably picked it up from the Sumerians. But it was the Romans who brought mosaics to Britain. And apart from the introduction of nylon backing to hold the tiles together, the techniques themselves haven't changed much over 5,000 years. It's the designs which have undergone a really radical change. In the recent past, modern mosaics have been restricted to the walls of public libraries and the odd swimming pool, and, by and large, it looked as if the true art of the mosaic could well disappear. Fortunately, that has not happened. People often ask me why I prefer to spend hours teaching my students to stick tiny squares onto tiles when I could be doing something else. And it's certainly the case that the process demands both time and motivation on occasions. It can even give you a really bad headache. But in fact, there's something very therapeutic about it. I think it has something to do with breaking things up and then reconstructing them. For every course I teach, we have jars and jars of brightly coloured glass, odd bits of china, broken plates and dishes, and most people just can't wait to start sticking them onto larger stretches of concrete. For the beginners, we produce mosaic packs, which contain all the essentials you need and explain clearly how to go about things. Each course includes a weekend workshop, which is attended by the majority of the students, and it's actually a wonderful way of relaxing. The skill's really within everyone's scope, especially if you have an eye for colour and a certain dexterity. It helps if you enjoy working with your hands and, of course, have patience. I'm often asked if I do puzzles, and it's not such a silly question as it sounds because it's a very good comparison of skills. Some people do get a bit scared, faced with all that choice, but that's why the mosaic packs are so popular. But I try to teach people to be inventive as well. If you look around yourself, there's plenty of evidence that the art is enjoying a revival. Not only do you see mosaic ashtrays and soap dishes, but you can actually now find them decorating underground station walls. Now, I'm not suggesting that you start pulling your own home to pieces and replacing everything with mosaics, although I often find myself looking at chests of drawers and thinking, just a border perhaps. Still, my reply to my over-anxious students is, all right, I know it takes hours, but after all, it's a labour of love, and you have something which will give pleasure for a long time afterwards. Now, if you're interested in trying out the effect in your own home...
That is the end of Part 1. Part 2. You will hear part of a radio programme in which someone is talking about summer courses at colleges and universities in Britain. For questions 9 to 16, complete the sentences.
Now, if you're thinking of how you're going to spend your summer holidays and are fed up with just lying in the sun, maybe you should consider an educational holiday. Universities, colleges and schools in Britain are now offering a wide range of courses in various subjects and lasting anything from a fortnight to 3 months. The 2-week courses are intensive courses, with each day consisting of teaching, visits to relevant places of interest, and private study sessions. If you don't fancy studying alone in your room, you'll be pleased to hear that all the centres have libraries, which are open until late. Students don't need to look for somewhere to stay during the course, because on intensive courses, accommodation is offered on campus, which is a considerable advantage. The only problem is that these fully residential courses can cost as much as £400 a week, so some students might be put off for financial reasons. Some colleges and universities have grouped together to form the Summer Academy. These courses are all residential and make strong use of the university's surroundings, with many visits to places of historical and geographical interest in the surrounding area. The Summer Academy courses are mostly taken for pleasure, but a limited number now offer recognised qualifications which a student can use towards a university degree or diploma, if they decide they want to continue studying. Courses awarding these types of qualification are proving extremely popular. For some people, going on a course may change their lives. I spoke to one student who had studied creative writing at Edinburgh University. He had been a company director, but felt disillusioned with his career. Originally, he took the course for pleasure, but found he enjoyed it so much that he left his job and decided to try and make a go of it as a writer. He believes that the summer school was instrumental in giving him the confidence to do this. As well as giving people the chance to try something new, summer schools can also help existing students with their degrees, and can even shorten the time they need to spend at college. This will suit students anxious to complete their courses and get working as quickly as possible. According to a student I spoke to, another advantage of summer school is that it attracts a far wider range of students than normal degree courses do, and this variety adds interest to the course.
That is the end of Part 2. Part 3. You will hear part of a radio programme in which two people, Sally White and Martin Jones, are discussing the popularity of audiobooks, books recorded on tape, and the problems involved with abridging books before taping them. For questions 17 to 24, choose the correct answer A, B, C or D.
And today, our subject for discussion is audiobooks. We have two guests in the studio, Martin Jones, who owns an audiobook shop, and Sally White, whose job it is to abridge or shorten books for the audio market. Now, I was amazed to find out just how popular it has become to listen to books on tape. What do you think is the reason for this? Sally?
Well, people are often very short of time. If you commute each day and have to spend, say, an hour in the car, then you can listen to part of a tape and then go on where you left off. And many people like to listen to audiobooks while doing monotonous household chores like ironing or dusting. However, I suspect that it's when people are trying to drop off at the end of a busy day that greatest use is made of them. I suppose it's like being read to as kids.
Yes, and in fact these audiobooks have also become popular among children. I often listen to them with mine. I suppose the fear here is that children will become lazy. I mean, it's much easier to listen to a story than read it yourself.
Yes, of course it is. But I'm not sure this will necessarily put children off reading. I don't know. But the great thing is that they can listen to books which are far too difficult for them to read. It may mean, of course, that busy parents are tempted to put on a tape rather than take the time to read to their kids. But then I'm sure many would actually prefer to listen to professionals rather than tired mums and dads.
What do you think, Martin?
Well, I'd like to tell you about a lady who came into this shop just last week, and she was telling us about these family driving holidays to France, which used to be a disaster, with the kids in the back making a row, not being able to understand French radio. And she swore she would never take them to France again. Then she discovered audiobooks, and suddenly the journeys there are a joy.
Now, I hear that audiobooks are even more popular in the States.
Yes, it's certainly a huge, huge market in the States, although I don't think audiobooks started there. Maybe it's because there's a tradition here in the UK from radio of spoken words being an acceptable medium, whereas in America, of course, it's a different story. In the main, Americans don't seem to get as much drama or stories on the radio, so they're going out and getting audiobooks. And the principal attraction is that they need something to listen to because of the time they spend on the road. Places are so much farther apart. An audiobook passes the time.
And what are the reasons for sometimes asking the author to do the reading rather than employing a professional?
Oh, it depends. Obviously, the author is the one who's closest to the book, and they may have a particular interpretation of the book that they are anxious to portray. Most authors will have already done public readings of their books anyway, as part of their promotional activities at the time of publication, so they've probably read parts of it already. Otherwise, professional actors are used. We're very lucky in Britain to have such a wealth of actors who can bring the story alive completely.
Now, Sally, your job is to abridge books especially for the audio market. I suspect a lot of people would say that you shouldn't mess about with what an author has written.
Oh, no, I don't agree. Most of the abridgments these days are really extremely good. Abridgers interpret the story in the way they believe the author has written it. But the point about abridgments is that one's adapting it to create a new version of the story, so it will inevitably be different to the original. Now, obviously, some books are easier to abridge than others.
Yes, I'd imagine a 1,000-page volume by Charles Dickens must be a bit of a nightmare.
Well, what we do is to trim the excess off, so it's more to do with the way they write. Beryl Bainbridge, for instance, writes so beautifully and sparsely that it's harder to cut into her than Charles Dickens with his pages of detailed descriptions. Well, this is probably the case with any kind of book.
We shouldn't forget that many books are not abridged before being taped. I would say that these have now grown to account for about 20% of the audio market. So, yes, some people do prefer to listen to the whole book. We've got Anna Karenina that has just come on the market. It's on 24 tapes, so you can imagine how long it is.
24 tapes? How long is a tape?
Well, each tape is about 90 minutes, and the whole set comes to £90. Though it's a lot of money, we're talking about a lifetime's listening, which is really something, isn't it?
Well, we are nearly out of time. But very briefly then, why not, in that case, why not write things specifically for audio? Something that's never been a written book. You could argue it's a new art form, so why not have new people writing just for audio?
Well, you could, and the BBC commissions specific work for radio all the time. It probably wouldn't succeed because the audio market isn't large enough to finance its own original writing at the moment. Anyway, I don't think people are unhappy about that. It's the old favourites rather than the newer titles that have proved the most popular in audio form.
Well, thank you both very much. And now...
That is the end of part 3. Now look at the fourth and last part of the test. Part 4 consists of 2 tasks. You will hear 5 short extracts in which different people are talking about the importance of eating breakfast. Look at task 1. For questions 25 to 29, match the extracts with the speakers listed A to H. Now look at task 2. For questions 30 to 34, match the extracts with the comments listed A to H. Speaker 1.
In common with most of my colleagues on the track, I'm training in the morning most of the time, as well as throughout the day. And sometimes we have to compete in the mornings too, as early as 7 or 8 in some places in the world. And people say to me, "And you really eat before that?" But if you think about it, you absolutely can't perform to the best of your abilities without fueling your body, or your mind for that matter. So the message for kids who've got their sights set on gold is don't skip your breakfast before you train.
Speaker 2.
I have to admit that I was one of those awful people who used to tell others to do something that I didn't do myself. It wasn't until I was invited to present a report on a conference in the USA, and I was sceptical before that too, that I came back a convert. There's good research to show that people are healthier if they eat breakfast, and everything I heard was quite convincing, and I've gone on to use quite a lot of it in my column, you know. I read up the research and did a few pieces on it myself, which were quite well received, even by the professionals.
Speaker 3.
Well, I read that the latest thinking is that whatever you eat in the morning, your metabolic rate goes up slightly, so the rate you burn calories goes up too. Even if you sit about a lot like me, if you've had a good breakfast, you still won't necessarily put on weight. Sounds crazy, but just think, if you don't eat first thing, you get a rumbly tummy about mid-morning, and what happens next? Well, what I do is rush out to the vending machine after I've pulled into the next station and grab something quick, which is usually chocolate or crisps, you know, something full of fat and sugar. So I suppose those newspaper articles are right, really, aren't they?
Speaker 4.
I'll be absolutely honest with you. I usually wake up and don't feel particularly hungry, but especially when you've got an early start and you can't be absolutely sure where the next meal is coming from. I mean, it could be breakfast, lunch or dinner, depending on where your next stopover is and what time it is there. And during all that time, you might have served all manner of meals too. So you have to think ahead, and I generally make sure I have something breakfast-like before each shift, even if it's not morning, and then I don't get hunger pangs in the cabin.
Speaker 5.
I think that if you're someone who skips breakfast, for want of a better term, you don't know what you're missing until you try. And I think that it's especially important to try and get this message across to parents. I can tell which ones in my group have missed breakfast. They lack energy, and they're the ones who get all the colds and that, honestly. But it's got to fit in with the whole family's normal way of life too. It's no good making great resolutions and breaking them 2 days later because you can't get up in time, or it's going to make you late for work.
That is the end of part 4. That is the end of the test.